Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to use the nuclear weapons purportedly to preserve the Russia's integrity. Well, this nuclear threat comes at the backdrop of the military reverses suffered by Putin-led Russia in the war on Ukraine. So, since February this year, when the military operation has begun, Russia always had upper hand. But surprisingly, in the recent past, supported by the Western weapons, Ukraine could make very significant advances. Ukraine could liberate from the Russian occupation at least 3,000 acres of 3,000 square kilometers of its territory. Well, these military reverses provoked Russian president to hurl the threat of use of nuclear weapons. So this is not the first time Putin is doing it. In fact, early in the war too he has threatened, but at the time Putin was having an edge in the war. But now at a time when the Russia has faced military reverses, Putin renewing the threat of nuclear weapons sounds very significant. But what will be the impact of this threat? Well, before I get into this particular question, let me also tell you, Putin started the war on the pretext that the US-led NATO is expanding into the Russian courtyard. So the United States has promised the then Soviet leader Gorbachev that the NATO will not expand eastwards. Well, but US and the NATO has broken all these promises. So there has been a significant expansion of NATO eastwards, that many East European countries, which mean the former Soviet Republic countries, were inducted into the NATO, much to the disenchantment of Russia. In fact, Russia has always been protesting against the eastward expansion of NATO, so since the fall of the Soviet Union, but the NATO never listened to the Russian concerns. So, but the ticking point came when the Georgia and Ukraine were proposed to be made NATO member, especially when Ukraine is proposed to be made a NATO member. So President Putin ordered a military operation in Georgia, and he has occupied Crimea in 2014. And now when Ukraine was almost ready to enter the NATO, Russia has declared a military operation. So the primary reason cited by the Putin was to deter Ukraine from joining NATO, to deter NATO, US-led NATO, from expanding towards Russia. Well, this was a legitimate security concern of Russia. Even India, in speaking in the United Nations, has indirectly referred to this concern. So therefore, anybody in the initial stage, everybody found fault with the US and NATO for unnecessarily provoking Russia. But as the Russia declared war on its neighbor Ukraine, so there is no military parity between Ukraine and Russia. So Russia's unilateral military action on Ukraine raised serious questions on the Putin strategy also. In fact, I myself told that this strategy is a flawed strategy. As long as he opposed the NATO expansion, fine, it was a legitimate concern. But Russia has no right to annex territories from its neighboring country. So, what did Russia achieve? In fact, what happened post-war is Sweden and Finland, which were hitherto not the members of NATO, which were hitherto not ready to join NATO, have now joined the NATO. So, tomorrow or day after, even sooner or later, even Ukraine may also join the NATO. So ultimately, Putin's unilateral military operation on Ukraine has led to the further expansion of NATO. So the same will happen with the Putin's nuclear threat. So the argument of President Putin is, when Russia's existence is questioned by the Western allies, to defend Russia, he will not hesitate to order nuclear strike. But actually what is happening, Russia has annexed certain territories of Ukraine, and to legitimize its occupation, he is resorting to referendum, so-called referendum in these areas, and thus formally these Ukrainian territories will be integrated with Russia. So he will bring in a sort of political legitimacy through this referendum. Once the Ukrainian territories become part of Russia, now the President Putin will say any attempt by Ukraine to recapture, to regain the lost territories will be considered as an attack on Russia. Because Ukrainian President has already declared that Ukraine forces will not rest till it regains the lands occupied by Russia. Even President Zelensky has even said that even Crimea, which was occupied by Russia in 2014, will also be regained. So the Russia's nuclear threat is an attempt to prevent West from supporting Ukraine in its effort to regain the lost lands. And it is a threat aimed at preventing Ukraine from attempting to recapture the lands which it lost to Russia in war. But will this happen? Well, everything will not go as Putin thought. NATO expansion did not stop with Putin's threats. In fact, it expanded further. So this may also lead to Europe rethinking on its nuclear strategy. As on today, barring France, almost all the European countries have given up their nuclear option. They are not developing their nuclear weapons. Instead, some of these countries have a nuclear weapons sharing agreement with United States. Countries like Belgium, Netherlands, Turkey, these nations have an understanding with the United States. So in case of necessity, the US will share its nuclear weapons. Only the France has its nuclear arsenal. Now there are three options before Europe. One, Europe may develop its own bomb called the Euro bomb, so that Europe will have a nuclear deterrence of its own. So the experience of Ukraine is to be noted here. Ukraine actually inherited a large nuclear arsenal from the then Soviet Union. After the breakup of the Soviet Union, the nuclear arsenal to a great extent was in Ukraine. But Ukraine voluntarily dismantled nuclear arsenal in 1994 for a guarantee to its security. Unfortunately, Russia did not stick to its commitment. The West failed to ensure that this commitment is honored. So today Ukrainians are rethinking. In case if they have not given up the nuclear weapons, perhaps Russia wouldn't have dared to attack it. Well, Europe is thinking today that in case if the Ukrainians have not given up the nuclear weapons, Russia wouldn't have attempted a military operation. So therefore, the problem with this is these nuclear threats actually embolden other nations, non-nuclear nations, to acquire nuclear weapons. This is precisely what is happening in Europe. So Europe is in fact rethinking about its dependence on NATO too, because during the Trump regime, the United States, the President Trump has even said the Europe is getting security at the expense of America. So this was the time when the France and Germany thought of having their own security architecture or enhance their own security architecture. But with the exit of Trump, the Russian war on Ukraine has further cemented the ties between America and NATO. Actually, US-led NATO and the European countries. In fact, there has been a gap emerging between America and its European NATO allies. But the Russian war on Ukraine has bridged this gap and further cemented the relations between America and its European NATO allies. So therefore, after this new threat of Russian president, Europe started rethinking. So the one possibility, number one, is Europe may have its own bomb. Second possibility is, well, it is not so easy to get a nuclear weapon So immediately. But the France has a nuclear arsenal. In fact, all through the history, France maintained that its nuclear arsenal is for its own security. But in 2020, President Macron said there is a European dimension to the France nuclear doctrine too. So the European countries may even finance further expansion of French nuclear arsenal so that this will be used as a security for entire Europe, not just the France. So there are reports that the Germany may finance expansion of the French nuclear arsenal that would actually provide a nuclear deterrent security to Europe. There is a third possibility, like the Belgium, Netherlands, Turkey, and there are, as I told you, there are 5 countries which have a nuclear weapon sharing agreement with the United States. Many more European countries may enter into this kind of an agreement with the United States. It would only mean the United States will further strengthen its hold on the Europe through the doctrine of sharing nuclear weapons. So President Putin's wrong strategy is miscalculation on the Ukraine war has led to further expansion of NATO, further consolidation of NATO, further cementing of the ties between the United States and its European NATO allies, and now it may even lead to greater nuclear proliferation with Europe trying to acquire some sort of nuclear deterrence. This would only further enhance the threat of nuclear war.